Foreign Minister, I wanted to begin by asking you how concerned you are about a potential operation in Rafah.
Well, very concerned for the humanitarian consequences of such an activity. Already the conditions are absolutely appalling, tragic. The scale of humanitarian grief currently in Gaza in general and in Rafah in particular, with the concentration of almost 1.3 million people within a very limited space, and the lack of shelter, lack of sanitation, lack of healthcare is creating a humanitarian catastrophe. Of course, any further wide-scale military activity would only compound the humanitarian situation, make it even more human death toll would substantially increase, in addition to the potential of displacement, further displacement.
Have you spoken directly to the Israelis about your concerns, and what have they said in response?
Well, we do have communications with the Israelis at a technical level related to also our efforts to find a ceasefire and to deal with the issue of the hostage and the detainees. You might recall that at the beginning of this crisis, there were official comments related to the objective, and among the objective was displacement. That has subsided, but there are also efforts to reassure us. But I think that the important thing is the actions and not the rhetoric. It is the actions that will create the consequences, and that is what we are trying to avoid.
There's a lot of focus at the moment about a contingency plan that Egypt is putting together on the Rafah crossing, that you're clearing an area, erecting walls, monitoring aerial shots have shown that there are bulldozers in the area preparing for an influx of Palestinian refugees.
There seems to be an exaggeration in terms of all of this. No, we are not preparing anything on our side of the border. Whatever is happening is the ordinary maintenance of our border and our border fortifications. It is in no way related to providing any camps or shelter on our side of the border. We are providing a great deal of humanitarian assistance and tents for the sheltering of the Palestinians who do not have any shelter, and in areas that we hope will be immune from military activity because
so
they
under
are
no circumstances is this area being prepared?
No, there's no preparations whatsoever related to the influx of any civilians from Gaza into Egyptian territory. But we have fortifications that have been there for years and years, and it's only natural that these fortifications need to be maintained, and we will continue to operate in providing access to humanitarian trucks that are piling up on our side of the border.
Is the idea of an influx of Palestinian refugees into Egypt a red line for you?
Absolutely, and we've indicated this at the highest level. This is not an acceptable circumstance. We will not accept the liquidation of the Palestinian cause by removing Palestinians from their territory, from their lands, and creating new conditions of displacement. Displacement is prohibited under international humanitarian law, and it should not in any way be acceptable, nor should it be encouraged.
Have the Israelis given you any kind of heads up, the troops on the borders, about an impending major operation which would include bombardment in Rafah?
No, there has not been any direct communications related to their military activity and their military planning.
Do you expect some kind of dialogue if that were to happen, given how tense that would create the situation on the border?
Well, as I mentioned, we do have technical discussions about ongoing issues related to the provision of humanitarian assistance, the general conditions in Gaza, and of course the mediation that we are undertaking. But we are again, I think I've made it absolutely clear that we oppose any form of displacement, whether internal or external, and we believe that applies also to the West Bank as it does apply to Gaza.
When we say it's a red line then, if there was an attempt, what would you do?
Well, we will deal with these issues when they happen. I don't think it's useful to speculate at this juncture. I think the international community has demonstrated that it is opposed to displacement. It has been incorporated in the Security Council resolutions that have been issued. 2027 was the last one. So there is a international consensus in refusing any form of displacement. And I think it will be incumbent on the international community, not only Egypt, to take action if displacement was to be factual.
Would it put at risk any of the treaties you have with Israel? I'm talking about the 1979 Camp David Treaty.
Well, I think, again, I don't want to speculate on how it would affect the legal relationship that exists. We have, I think, held very accurately and have implemented very accurately the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty. We believe that in 4 decades we have shown its value to both sides and continue to maintain the importance of it being the basis upon which our relationships proceed. Having said that, of course, there will be an interpretation. There are also stipulations in the treaty that places obligations on both sides to protect their borders, and we would have to evaluate to what extent there is a respect of all of the stipulations of that treaty.
There's a lot of anger from the humanitarian organizations about the level of aid not being able to get in through the Rafah crossing. Israel has pointed the finger of blame on Egypt. How do you respond to that?
Well, that's absolutely ridiculous. We have, from the outset, been imploring for an increased volume of aid. The aid is only allowed to enter after being vetted by Israel, and thereby that vetting process has been the main obstacle to the increase in the volume of the aid. We have had discussions with the intervention of the United States to convince Israel of the need to provide more aid, to open their border crossings as well for the provision of aid. I see no reason why Israel should not provide aid itself to the Palestinians.
Why are they saying, what is the reason? What's the problem with the vetting?
You have to ask them that. From every perspective that we see, it is necessary to deal with the humanitarian suffering and to provide as much aid and as much trucks as possible. If you go to the Rafah crossing, you will see miles of trucks waiting to enter, waiting to be vetted in the Israeli crossing. And that vetting process sometimes is very cumbersome. I don't want to say by intention, but it's certainly taking much longer than it should in view of the situation on the ground and the human suffering. So it's ludicrous to say that we are in any way restricting the aid. It's in our best interest to provide the aid from a humanitarian perspective, but also to help the Palestinians remain on their land so that they do not fall prey to the objective of displacement and freeing the land from its inhabitants.
What is your relationship with Israel like now?
Let us say that it is continues to be a normal relationship based on our peace agreement, but of course we have differences of views on the situation in Gaza, that we have been calling for an immediate ceasefire, the provision of a greater volume of assistance, and indicating a refusal of displacement. Those are the 3 main tenets of our policy. But again, we do not see that this situation is in Israel's interest or in the interest of the region. Continuing the conflict and this form of escalation, the human suffering and what it can instigate in cycles of revenge and further conflict is not beneficial to the region, not beneficial to Egypt, its developmental objectives, or the stability and tranquility.
You've been directly involved in peace negotiations, a ceasefire, releasing the hostages. We've had direct lines of communication with the likes of the head of Mossad and CIA, with communications with Hamas as well as the Israelis. How is that going now?
Well, these are sensitive discussions, and again, our objective is to reach a pause, free the hostages, deal with hopefully a permanent ceasefire as well that can be motivated by the suspension. And we will continue to, with the help of the United States, Qatar and others, to hopefully promote for some understanding between the two sides that would be in the best interest of the civilians of Gaza.
Were you surprised then when Prime Minister Netanyahu rejected the latest round of talks?
Again, negotiations are always difficult, and I think we need to shelter them to a degree so that we might achieve progress, and we hope that there will be greater flexibility and a recognition of the need to address the pause and the release of hostages and move further to alleviate the human suffering that exists.
We, of course, have seen escalation now across the region, from Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, right across the board, and of course what the Houthis are doing as well. Are you concerned that if some kind of agreement isn't reached with Gaza, that this will completely escalate and tip the region over?
Well, what is happening in itself is an escalation of the situation related to what's happening in Gaza. We've seen the attack on the U.S. presence in Jordan. We've seen the consequences on the freedom of navigation in the Red Sea, the escalation on the Lebanese-Israeli borders. And this, there's always a possibility by virtue of mistakes that can happen, or by a widening and intensification of military activity that can put the whole region in a cycle of increased violence. We warned early on that there's a potential, a very high potential for such an eventuality, and again we fear that it might escalate.
Are you disappointed in the response and reaction of the United States?
I can say that I'm disappointed in the international community's overall response. There seems to be a lip service paid, but not an actual recognition and sufficient intervention to provide the safety for civilians in this very difficult situation.
Foreign Minister, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.